On July 1st, 1925, in a shabby working-class suburb of Paris, a small group of men stood outside a locked apartment door. Behind it was the single cramped room where the composer Erik Satie had lived for 27 years. And in all of that time, he had never once let another human being inside. Not a friend. Not a lover. Not even his own brother. Now Satie was dead. And as they forced the door and stepped into the dark, stale air of that room, they were about to discover that the strange, funny little man they thought they had known had been hiding an enormous secret. A secret that explains the saddest, most beautiful music that you, almost certainly, have already heard 100 times, without ever knowing its name. Listen. You know this. You have heard it in films, in commercials, in quiet moments, drifting out of an open cafe door. It is called the Gymnopédie. And today it is everywhere, the sound of calm itself. But the man who wrote it was one of the loneliest human beings who ever lived. And that soft, floating sadness you can hear underneath the beauty? That was not an accident. That was real. Erik Satie was, by almost any measure, one of the strangest figures in the entire history of music. He arrived in Paris in the 1880s and quickly became a fixture of the bohemian, artistic world of Montmartre, playing piano in a famous cabaret called the Black Cat. But it was his behavior that made him unforgettable. For one stretch of his life, he claimed to eat only white foods. Eggs, sugar, coconut, the bones of white animals. He founded his own religion, a church with exactly one member, himself, and solemnly excommunicated his enemies from it. He was said to carry a hammer in his pocket for protection. And he dressed, every single day, in an identical gray velvet suit. He bought a dozen of them at once, hung them in a row, and wore them until they fell apart. All of Paris nicknamed him the Velvet Gentleman. And on his musical scores, instead of the normal instructions a composer writes, like soft, or fast, or with feeling, Satie wrote strange little messages to whoever might play them. Play like a nightingale with a toothache, one says. Open your head. Another simply reads, with great kindness. He once wrote a tiny piece of music, barely a minute long, with an instruction that it should be repeated 840 times in a row, a performance that takes most pianists the better part of a full day. To everyone who met him, Erik Satie was a joke. A delightful character. A harmless, brilliant eccentric. And almost no one ever suspected what was hidden underneath. Because beneath all the jokes, something quiet and extraordinary was happening. While the celebrated composers of his time were writing vast, thundering, dramatic symphonies meant to overwhelm an audience, Satie was doing the exact opposite. He was writing music that was small, quiet, still. Music that did not demand your attention at all. He even invented a name for some of it. Furniture music, he called it, music meant to be in the room with you and simply ignored, like a chair, or the light from a window. Without anyone understanding what he was doing, Erik Satie was inventing the idea of ambient music, the calm, atmospheric, background sound that fills our entire world today, nearly a century before the rest of music caught up to him. And his gymnopédies and nocturnes, with their slow, circling, weightless melancholy, sounded like nothing else on earth. They sounded like loneliness made gentle. Like a sadness you could almost live inside. And there was a reason that they sounded that way. Because Erik Satie fell in love exactly once in his entire life. In 1893, he met a painter named Suzanne Valadon. She was brilliant, fiercely independent, a former circus trapeze artist who had become one of the great artists of Paris in her own right. And Satie fell for her instantly, and completely. It was the only romance he would ever have. On the very first night they spent together, he asked her to marry him. She said no. Their relationship lasted only about 6 months. And when it ended, something in Satie broke that never healed. He wrote, afterward, that she had left him with nothing but an icy loneliness that fills the head with emptiness, and the heart with sadness. He packed his things and left the heart of Paris behind. He moved out to a single rented room in a poor suburb called Arcueil. And there, alone, he would live for the next 27 years. And no one, for the rest of his life, would ever be allowed through that door. He kept the act going, right to the end. The jokes, the velvet suits, the strange public announcements. Every single day, he walked the 10 kilometers from his room all the way into Paris, and every night he walked the 10 kilometers back, stopping at his favorite cafés, charming everyone he met, a beloved local legend with his umbrella and his bowler hat. And every night, he returned to a room that no other living person had ever seen. He drank heavily for decades, and slowly it destroyed him. In 1925, it finally took his life. He was 59 years old. And then, at last, his friends opened the door. What they found inside stopped them where they stood. The room was filthy, and almost impossibly cramped, packed with the hidden life of a man they suddenly realized they had never truly known at all. There were 2 grand pianos, stacked one directly on top of the other, the upper one crammed full of old letters and packages, many of them never even opened. There were more than 100 umbrellas, dozens of them brand new, still in their wrapping, never once used. There were rows of identical gray velvet suits. And then, tucked behind the pianos, stuffed deep into the pockets of his coats, hidden away in the corners of that little room, they began to find the music. Compositions that everyone had assumed were lost forever. Pieces that no one had ever known existed at all. An entire secret lifetime of work, written and then hidden away, where no one could see it. But the thing that truly broke their hearts was smaller and quieter than all of it. They found letters. Love letters. Written to Suzanne Valadon. Tender, aching, desperate declarations of love, from a man who had lost her more than 30 years before. He had never stopped. Alone in that locked room, the funny little man with the umbrellas had gone on loving her, in complete secret, for the rest of his entire life, and had never breathed a word of it to a single living soul. So what was Erik Satie's music really hiding, all along? Everything. The eccentric in the velvet suit was a costume. A disguise worn by a man so wounded by one lost love that he sealed himself inside a single room for 27 years, let no one in.